We are at a point now where our economic decline in GDP has been slowing down. I think it's going to continue into the first 2 quarters of next year. I expect that by the 3rd quarter of next year, we would have bottomed out and the process of recovery will begin. But there's so many things that we have to do in the meanwhile. So debt to GDP is one of the targets, interest rates, of course, inflation. All of these are critical targets that have to be met. But as we had started addressing before we took the break, we can't just squeeze ourselves to death. You know, one man said to me, "Look, we have tightened our belts so tight that we don't have any waist left." We have to find those areas where we can stimulate growth. There are some sectors that have sort of just presented themselves. While I've indicated that we have to move beyond this strong, perhaps too heavy dependency on tourism and bauxite, let us recognize that both of them, and tourism in particular, has tremendous room for expansion and growth. We have to pursue that. But look at agriculture. Agriculture has done so well over the last couple of quarters, last 4 or 5 quarters, that we have now gone beyond where we were pre-Ivan. Remember, Ivan had damaged us, and then we had the Gustav that came afterwards. And we have been recording significant growth. And what is important in the direction in which we're seeking to take agriculture is that we're moving beyond just producing agricultural stuff. We're looking now at much closer integration with the agro-processing sector, because that is the only area in which agriculture will have room to expand. I mean, we can eat so much fresh food and fresh fruits. And Minister Tufton and Minister Samud are working closely on that. I'm not making any announcement now, but that is going to be a growth point. We're going to have to find ways of stimulating small and medium-sized enterprises, because they are the fastest means of creating new jobs, of providing new products and new services. We have done, I feel, a considerable amount in providing additional funding, in creating some space for them, in providing new incentives and so on, but more needs to be done and more will be done. A big challenge that we have, Ian, is so many of the things that need to be done and so many of the things that we want to do, and here is where you're going to come back at me with the contradiction. How do you do that when you're getting into an IMF program that puts such a hold,
compression and contraction
on your expenditure?
Precisely where I was going.
And therefore, what we have been doing, and I discussed it with the team last week, it's something that we have discussed at Cabinet. There are so many things that need to be done, which we have to find creative ways of ensuring that it can be done not by government but through public-private partnerships.
Give us some hints. Yeah. Give away something here.
I'll give you an example.
Yes.
I'll give you an example. Minister Chang has put together a tremendous and impressive program of water supply projects. We can get the money to borrow. I mean, the funds are available from bilateral partners. But under the agreement, there's going to be a ceiling on our borrowing capacity. Mm-hmm. What I've said to Dr. Chang is, why you don't look to see now, are there sections of that water supply program that you can privatize? Yeah. Water Commission will still have the overall responsibility, but is there a way we can channel those funds, not to the government, but to the private interest, that would say, we will sink the well, or we will upgrade the well, we will provide the pipeline. You know why I believe it can work? I saw something recently in the papers just this past week, where Member of Parliament Fitzjackson had made some arrangements. I don't know how all the details, I'm only going on the basis of the report I saw in the papers. Made some arrangements to provide water to Grange Lane through a private provider who was going to run the pipes, install the meters, bill the customers, collect the funds. This is possible through an amendment that was done by the previous administration to the regulations, and it started in North areas. I mentioned that just as one example of the creative ways that we're going to have to find solutions that can be pursued, notwithstanding the constraints that are going to be imposed on government's ability to spend during this period. In addition to that, the more we can get activity going, whether in traditional sectors or in new sectors, and the more we can bring growth to the economy so that the GDP improves, some of that contraction will ease because so many of the targets that are in the program are tied to the GDP. So that, some of them are tied to your revenues, but that many of them are tied to your GDP. So in terms of our borrowing targets, your borrowing is related to GDP. Grow the GDP, there's more space. But we have to use that space for serious projects, not just to meet domestic expenditure, but for serious projects that will expand the capacity in the economy.
What are the areas of cutbacks in expenditure that are likely to affect the public? Would the user fee policy, for example, be affected?
Well, certainly
talk about taxes, what about cutting of expenditure?
Insofar as tuition is concerned, no. Insofar as hospital charges are concerned, no. Because one of the interesting things with the IMF in terms of the discussions is that they have recognized the importance, particularly at times of stress like we're going through now, to maintain social programs. In fact, they're actually working with us to see how can we expand those social programs in certain areas, particularly in areas such as PATH, because the poverty line is not fixed. In times of stress, that poverty line moves up, which means that more people fall below the poverty line, and therefore it's going to be important to be able to respond. That's part of the program, but again, that has to be accommodated within certain limits. One of the things that we're doing, and I think Minister Spencer has already announced, is that we're seeking to recover from health insurers the cost of providing health care in public hospitals for those persons who are covered by health insurance. The intention is to subsidize the poor. The intention is not to subsidize health insurance companies. So that will bring some ease to the situation. But bear in mind, and this is where some of the criticisms that you hear made about the decision to abolish user fees at hospitals. We were collecting somewhere in the region of 15% of what was billed. But the collection of that 15% was impacting hard on the very poor. And therefore, when you look to see what it is that government has taken on as an added responsibility, and you measure that against the critical services that you need to provide for people who are poor, then in my own judgment, the cost benefits outweigh the alternative.
Prime Minister, when are we actually likely to ink the IMF agreement? Will we have it this year?
The IMF team is here now. They arrived late last week.
Are we likely to conclude this month?
I'm determined that we should. I met with our team shortly before the IMF people arrived, and they walked me through what they considered to be the critical issues that would stand in the way. Following a discussion with Cabinet, I was able to give them directions as to how we would seek to resolve those issues. Some of them have to do with cauterizing certain legacy commitments that the government has had for many, many years. For example, the cost of Air Jamaica.
Yes, things that you inherited.
Part of it too has to do with avoiding entering upon major new commitments that will impact on our debt and impact on the budget. And there are one or two particular ones that have been identified. I've already taken charge of those. We have instituted some arrangements to see to what extent those investment projects, where they are important to our future, can be proceeded with without any cost to government and without any contingent liability on the part of government. So I think that we have pretty much cleared the major hurdles, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to conclude it this week. I have learned from experience, and you won't get it out of me for me to say, well, by Thursday of this week, but I indicated that we were optimistic we'd be able to conclude by Christmas, and I believe that God will continue to be good.
Your optimism still holds?
God is good.
What's your message to the Jamaican people on the eve of this?
My message to the Jamaican people is